So what do you do? That was the question that kind of started this for me, and I'm always struck by how whenever you go to a party or a social gathering, that very often is the first question when you're meeting someone. And so innately we seem to derive meaning from the answer to that question. We think that what someone does tell us a bit about the person that they are. So what we do matters. And also when I was preparing this, I remembered what came to mind were the words that close the parable of the Good Samaritan. So this is a story that lots of us are familiar with. We hear it time and time again at church, at school, on retreats like this. But the final instruction sometimes gets lost in that. But the parable of the Good Samaritan ends with Jesus saying, "Go and do likewise." So again, we have doing. So today, I guess I'm going to talk about why what we do matters and how it's never really too late to change what it is that we do and to move on to another job or another form of work. But equally, sometimes it's good to stay in the same place and find meaning where we are. So a bit about myself. So I grew up in not so sunny Bognor Regis by the seaside, though in 2003 apparently it was the sunshine capital of the UK. So it's never been that again, and this wasn't in 2003, I was sunning myself somewhere else there. So yes, I grew up in a little seaside town. My dad was a psychiatrist and my mum was the head teacher of the local Catholic primary school. And I was a very geeky child. I had a lot of obsessions. I was very obsessed with the Titanic. I had a videotape of the Titanic, a documentary about the submarine going down and finding it that I would watch repeatedly. I was obsessed with Alan Shearer and Newcastle United. The colour yellow, this continues. And my nickname, and most of all, I guess, I enjoyed playing very elaborate imaginary games with my little sister there and my grandparents. And my nickname as a child was the Y-Bird. And this is the Y-Bird, and I don't know, has anyone come across the Y-Bird before? Excellent, good. We've got some Playdays people in the house. So Playdays was a children's television programme where there was a bus, they would stop at different, and Y-Bird was one of the stops. And she was this kind of, well, you can see, quite sassy, wise owl with her little kind of rolling eyes. Anyway, I was called the Y-Bird because I would always, whatever my parents or grandparents or teachers said, but why? Why is the sun in the sky? Why do we have to go to church? Why do I have to eat peas with my fish fingers? Why? And that why has kind of continued through my life. And I think for me, the moment when I was asking the most whys was in my mid-teens. So when I was 13, I was very poorly. I started to lose a lot of weight. Was having fevers in the night and had some lumps on my neck. And after kind of about 2 months of going back and forth to the doctors, I was diagnosed with a type of cancer. So at the age of 13, I started treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma. And clearly that was, an incredibly grueling experience. But what got me through that was there was a set of us on the ward. It was about 4 or 5 beds, and we'd all be kind of plugged up to our chemo machines and these strips and just chatting and getting to know each other. And at the end of that, we kind of said, it was almost like being in the trenches. We had this bond that was formed in very extreme circumstances and adversity. And sadly, some of the friends that I have made, their treatment wasn't successful. And they died. And so as a 14 or 15-year-old going back to school, having got better, I remember just, school basically just felt pointless. And I was thinking, why am I here? Why are people asking me to choose my GCSEs? Why did I survive? Why have they died? All of these huge questions. And I remember in an assembly, they showed us this quote, God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. He does nothing in vain. He knows what he is about. And at the time, that was immensely irritating. I was like, oh, great. He knows what he's about. Well, I don't know what he's about, and I don't know what I'm about, and just being a very cross, angsty person. And up until this point, I'd always wanted to be a doctor. And then suddenly I thought, no, this now all feels a bit too close to home, and I didn't want to do that anymore, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And as is often the way, teachers and family, they say, well, do what you enjoy. And that's really wise advice, actually. We should be really attentive to the things that energise us and that we find ourselves kind of lighting up as we talk about them. And so for me, the choice then, I loved reading and writing. I thought, okay, I'll go and study English at university. So I did my A-levels, but in the summer, between getting my A-level results and going off to university, I went to visit my aunt in South Africa. And she was working in a clinic with people with HIV and tuberculosis. And suddenly I was kind of confronted with this glaring injustice. I saw their difficulties, I saw their inability to pay for their treatment, to make ends meet, and I was really troubled by that. And so I went back to her house in the evening, I remember, and I was kind of Googling, and I thought, what I want to study is things that mean I can add something to this situation. And I found a random university, a very small one in London, called the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, and a course there in development economics. So the politics and economics of the world, but with a particular focus on Africa and Asia. And I thought, I'll do that. But obviously I had this place to study English at university, so I come home and explain this to my parents. And to their credit, they were very understanding, because what this basically involved was a very high-risk strategy on A-level results day, where in order to go into clearing to kind of get my place at SOAS, I had to ring up and reject my offer to study English. And so there's several hours when you're basically in limbo, and you could, it might not have paid off and you don't have anything. So they were very kind in letting me do that, and I'm sure it was a worry for them. So I went off to SOAS and I started to make sense of the world and to see kind of how everything fitted together and what my part could be. And during that, I went on a year abroad. I learnt Swahili at SOAS, and I went and lived in Tanzania for a year. And we were supposed to kind of be moving around different places, but there was a terrible terrorist attack in Kenya. And so they said, we'd rather you didn't, we just want you to stay put. So I ended up in Zanzibar, which is an island off the coast of Tanzania. There's about 1 million people that live there, and you can go from one end to the other in about 2 hours. And I got chatting with a Norwegian doctor in a coffee shop. He said, oh, what are you here, what are you doing? I said, well, I actually don't really have anything to do. We were only meant to be here for a few weeks, and now we're staying here for the whole year. And I said, this is what I'm interested in. I like health economics. And he said, right, well, come along. And so he took me. I got up early, 5 o'clock in the morning one day, drove down to the south of the island to a very rural hospital, and basically started to try and run a triage service. And that's where you kind of basically try and choose what that patient needs and how you prioritise between them. And that's really important in low income settings, because they don't have enough resources. So actually those choices of, if there's a power cut, who are we going to operate on with the generated power we've got, is really important. So I did a lot about doing that. And when I was in that setting, I started to think about my strengths and weaknesses in a different way. And I think that's something that is really important when you are deciding what it is you want to do for your work. And so I could see that I was all right on the front line. We'd be sorting out a bit of a flood in this office there in part of the hospital. I wish I'd brought pictures, actually, so you could see how kind of stripped back it was. And I could do that, but I could see that other people around me could do it better than me. I thought, I'm fine at dealing with this kind of very anxious mother or whatever, but it's not what I'm best at. And then what I did see was that what I could do was make links and think, well, actually, if this system was in place, that wouldn't happen. And I was kind of that level up. And I spoke to people and said, I really think, if we brought in this process and was starting to kind of be, I guess, a bit strategic. And they said, we'd never thought of doing that before. And so it's those moments that I think we all need to be attentive to, of what am I noticing that others aren't? And actually also seeing, well, I could do that, but I'm not as good at doing that as that person, and kind of sussing out those things. So I came back to the UK and I thought, okay, the word for all of these things is policy, and I'm clearly quite good at doing that. And so I decided that I would go and study policy. And I applied to do a master's degree in public policy at Oxford. And I was rejected. And it was really the first kind of experience in my academic life of a kind of big no like that. And I was living in the Catholic chaplaincy in London at the time, in Newman House. I don't know if any of you will be... Yeah, Matthew has been to Mass there a few times. And the funny thing about living there was that you had a chapel in your house, I guess. So I went, and I remember sitting by the tabernacle and having a huge cry. And now, even now, going in that church, I think, oh yeah, I remember that moment where I was in floods of tears. And this came to me from the prophet Isaiah. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. And I think so often we don't perceive it. We don't see what God's doing. We don't see how all of these kind of things are contributing to our life in a different path. But I decided that night, in my tears, I thought, okay, I'm just going to trust in whatever this new thing is. And the next day I saw a job advert to work for CAFOD, which is the Catholic aid agency who do lots of work in developing countries. And I applied for it and I got that. And that was my first job. And from there, I've kind of stayed in policy and ended up where I am working for the government at the health department. And so I think for me, it's really been about kind of, what is it that I'm good at that others aren't? What do I bring to this situation that other people don't? And in that, you have a really beautiful recognition of other people's gifts, which at times is a bit annoying. And it's easy to think, oh, I just wish I could be more like that person. But knowing what it is that you uniquely bring was really important for me. And similarly, thinking, yes, about that which we find inspiring, but also that really hurts us. And some of those experiences that were painful, like my time in the hospital, really are what kind of make us. And I suppose now, working in the health department as I do, I'm someone who knows the value of health. I know that when you're healthy, you can participate in life in a completely different way than you would otherwise, and what a gift it is. And so naturally I want this nation to have that all of the time and to have long and happy lives. And so I really feel motivated to do that. And I think what you kind of see is that you do a winding path. And so obviously I talked about being rejected by Oxford, but about a year ago now, Oxford University wrote to me and said, Claire, would you come and give us a guest lecture on outcomes-based commissioning in the NHS? And I thought,
did you say no?
I graciously accepted. And so I think it's just there's meaning in what happens, and when things go wrong, actually just trusting that you might feel like being tugged from the path that you really had set out and had seen yourself doing, but there is so much out there, and it's never too late to tell your parents, actually I don't want to study that, I want to study this, or any of those things, and we can change our mind, and we can react to the world around us. And I'm conscious of what Adam said about language last night, so I'll read it first and then I'll try and put it into simple terms. So St. John Henry Newman said, with Christians, a poetical view of things is a duty. We are bid to colour all things with hues of faith, to see a divine meaning in every event. And so I think probably how we can think about this in a simple way is two ways. Either through glasses, so that as Christians we're told to put on these glasses and they colour what we see, they colour our rejection, they colour our painful experiences, all of that, and give them a new meaning. Or we can think of them as Instagram filters, and we place those on the picture, and it looks different, it transforms it. And I think that's what we're called to do, is see those patterns and see those experiences in a different way. But something that I also really wanted to talk about is when you're in your job and it feels very meaningless. And Lucy will know that that's a place that I'm in a lot of the time. And I think that is a reality. And for us, it was brought into really stark contrast about 18 months or so ago when Lucy was working in a prison. And so we would have these dinner table conversations, and you'd say, oh, what did you do today? And Lucy said, well, you know, I talked down this guy who was thinking of killing himself. I broke up a fight. I then had a conversation with someone about why they should go to their education class. What did you do? And I'd be like, well, I wrote some advice for a minister. Yeah, basically spent the day writing about economics. And it did. It felt a bit futile. And there are definitely elements of my work now that feel a bit of a trudge and don't feel like I'm dramatically changing lives. And for me, that kind of tension of being on the front line or being in a kind of ivory tower, as it were, is very real. But sometimes we have to stay put. And I think there is great value in stability and not necessarily moving the second that we feel that tension. Because some tensions we kind of just need to live in and to use. And actually, this is a very Benedictine thing. So I remember when I went to Worth and first heard about how the monks take a vow of stability as well. And so when they do that, they're choosing to stay in the same place. And I think what that means is you can't externalize your problems or the way you're feeling. I can't say in work, oh, I would be happier or things would be more meaningful if I was over there. It basically gets rid of this illusion that there is something better always out there, the kind of grass is greener. And you need to look for the meaning where you are. And for me, what this has looked like in my office actually has been a couple of things. At a very basic level, it's been about just getting a lot of meaning from the human interactions that I have with my colleagues and being the person that remembers what they did at the weekend and asks what they're doing on the weekend on Friday, remembers it and speaks to them about it on Monday. And in particular, what I've got a lot of meaning out of work recently is my interactions with some of my much older colleagues. So the civil service can be a very kind of young, fast, dynamic environment. And there are also people who are at the end of their careers, who are in their 60s, who are close to retirement but just need to go that little bit further to get the pension that they want or whatever. And I think that the office now can be quite a lonely and isolating place for them. And I've just started having lunch with them, and often, or going and taking a cup of tea, or just speaking to them. And at first, they probably thought that was a bit weird, and was surprised. But it's been huge for me that when actually I have a kind of rubbish day and don't think I've done anything, and sometimes think I might have actually done something to make the problem worse rather than better, that I have that meaning from them. And so. This quote from Mary Lou Kaunaki really stood out for me on that. It is no mistake either, I believe, that Mary Magdalene first looked on the risen Jesus that early morning on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, and saw, of all things, a gardener. Our task is about planting and sowing and caring for hope in whatever garden we find ourselves. So whatever you're doing at the moment, and I loved last night going around and hearing what people do, and James hacks stuff for a living, which is awesome. So there's some really exciting and interesting things that you do, but that's the garden that you're in, and who's with you in that garden, and just start thinking about actually what can I do where I am to be meaningful, and if my task, my work task doesn't feel meaningful, how can I do that in a different way? And that has certainly given me a lot of consolation when I have felt very frustrated at work. For me, it's not the right time to move on now. and I've just got to kind of be here. And I think that, that doesn't mean that you should stay and be unhappy in your job. I think on average a human spends 90,000 hours at work in their lifetime. So, I'm not suggesting anyone stays in a job where they're deeply unhappy. But a lot of times in life it will be the right thing to do, to just stay where you are for the moment and not look side to side, and just be there. And this from Colossians, it must have been something that was going on there, and Paul was writing to them about their work. Whatever your task, put yourselves into it as done for the Lord and not for your masters, since you know that from the Lord you'll receive the inheritance as your reward. You serve the Lord Christ. So again, just kind of putting those glasses on and thinking, okay, I'm not doing this for that reason. I'm not doing it for this reason. I'm doing it, to serve God and to be just a good person to be around. So stability is important. So far, recap. First thing, you can change your mind. You can choose to do what you want to do, and it's not too late to do that. And we should be sensitive to what we're learning about our strengths and weaknesses as we go through life, and understanding what our gifts are. But secondly, sometimes it will be right to not go darting off in search of meaning, but to try and find the meaning where we are. And then thirdly, I wanted to think quickly about the time we spend outside of our work, outside of the classroom, outside of the office, outside of the kitchen, all of these places where we work, and just and think about how we spend our time. So someone estimated that if you try to put a financial number on all of the voluntary work that happens in this country, it would be around £3.5 billion. So that's a lot, okay? But actually that money, we all know, is nothing of the value that work really brings. And for me, often, I might have done some really quite grand and exciting things in my working week. I've been lucky enough to go to Downing Street, to give advice there, to knock on that number 10 door. But still, usually the absolute best thing I do is hang out with a bunch of 7-year-olds every Sunday. So I volunteer as a First Holy Communion catechist in my parish. And yes, without fail, that normally is the highlight of my week. And I just think about it as a really conscious use of my time. And at work, it's really important for me to remember things. Very often I'm put on the spot and a minister will say, yeah, but what percentage of people have had vaccines in that area in the last quarter, or what? And I need to have those numbers in my head and to hand. And that used to kind of stress me out. And now I just think, no, it's far more important for me to have the names of all of these 40 children in my brain, and to remember those, and to remember the names of all those siblings. And I just make a choice, and I think I can look up that statistic and I'll tell him, but I want to use the capacity in my memory to remember all these children's names. And so sometimes we can do that, and that's valuable. And yeah, they're brilliant, and probably seeing them make their First Holy Communion last year probably was one of the best days of my life. And these little, standing on steps at the lectern to do their bidding prayers and things like that, just really wonderful children who teach me gratitude and blow me away. So each week they get to kind of choose what they pray about. And in East Acton, where we live, it's quite a poor part of London, and these children do have really difficult lives. And I remember this boy, he's quite chunky, usually very reticent, and he squabbles. His cousins are in the class as well, and they're always having fights. And we said, right, why don't you do the prayers today, Wyatt? And he said, "Dear Jesus, thanks for making us be alive." And I thought, yeah, thanks for making us be alive. So they're great, and they blow me away. And last year for Mother's Day, I don't know, some of you will remember in churches often they have a little kind of bucket of daffodils, don't they, at the front of the altar, and children can go up and pick a daffodil and take them to their mum. And the priest said, I just want you to give the flowers, yes, to your mum, but if your mum's not here, just someone who's been kind and gentle. And one by one, children kept bringing me these daffodils, and I was weeping. But yeah, they're brilliant, and I think it's about finding those times where your work actually is just so at the back of your mind, and you're kind of prioritising something else and using your time, and that is our work too. I think we should think about the meaning we get from things that aren't necessarily paid, because that's more to it. This was one of the cards that one of the girls wrote me afterwards. Thank you for always helping when I get stuck on questions. And I thought, well, no, thank you for helping me get unstuck. So I think there really are three things, I suppose, to take away from what I've shared today, and I'm sure there'll be different things that touch different people. And I know that from speaking to all of you last night, people are at different kind of transition points, finishing up with studies, finishing up with jobs and looking for something new, moving into new areas. And so I think if you're in that transition moment, my message is definitely it's not too late to change. You know, we're going to be working for a very long time, and it's okay to do something radical, to do an about turn, to really be attentive and listen to that inner voice that Adam was speaking about last night. But if actually you are somewhere, you're committed to something, you know you're going to be there, then you can find meaning in that place. And thirdly, that you can look for meaning in a kind of outside of the work realm, and that we should think about how we use our time as our work, really. So I think that's it for me.